Well, we are on to our Ferguson, issue 2. Let me just say this to start with, because we mentioned this kind of before class. You do have a paper due at the end of the class, okay? That's sort of your final exam, if you will, is your final paper. The question was, do I have a list of topics? I do not. I do that on purpose. I want you to pick something that hopefully you are interested in. It's wide open, any appropriate topic, that is anything that relates to this course. Now, it was also asked, well, could we sort of work off of something we've already done? Yes, you can. So like, let's say one of these topics for Ferguson, or part of it caught your interest, and you want to expand that or explore it more. That's certainly there. Yes?
Do we have to worry about like accidentally getting somebody else's similar topic, or just...
Well, you know, I'd say just run them by me. Yeah, I'm not too worried about, I mean, hopefully people aren't going to all pick the same thing. So if I start to see a trend where everybody's picking the same, the main thing is resources are limited. And so I would like to have diversity in our papers because it gives us more to talk about in here. Yes?
Are those just going to be like regular papers that we turn in you, or do we have to present them as well?
Oh, well, we'll talk about that later. Now, our good friend Paxton, I'm going to give you this, I'll give you this little clicker thing if you like it. You can use it. You don't have to use it if you don't like it. Completely up to you. So if you want to forward, you just do this, and that goes back. And if you want to point, you just hit that little thing. Okay. Let me get out of the way. There you go.
So I did Aristotle and the Peripatetics and skepticism and cynicism. And so he lived from 384 to 322 BC, and he was born at Stagirus at Chalcidice, and his father was a doctor, and that was one of the reasons why, you know, he decided to get involved in the biology and everything, because he was in a house where his father was a doctor. And he attended the academy, and he even went there to study under Plato. And when he was there, Plato was at the last stage of development. And when Plato died, Aristotle withdrew from Athens, understandably so. And that bust over there, you know, we're not sure what Aristotle really looked like, but the ancients are just like, well, that's the best interpretation we can give you of what he looked like. So. And Aristotle returned to Athens in 334 BC. And here's the iconic famous picture of Aristotle and Plato. And Aristotle taught in a rented building gymnasium called the Lyceum. And his successor, his name was like Theophrastus. And his successor taught at the same building. And
if you wanted to see that picture, you have to go to the Vatican. It's in the Vatican. It's called the School of Philosophers, the School of Philosophy.
A lot of it.
It's just all filled with philosophers. Every one of those guys on there is famous. Not like me, I'm not famous, but they're all famous. Okay, keep going.
Yeah, a lot of famous philosopher paintings and, you know, just iconic religious paintings are in the Vatican, as you said.
It is,
so,
yeah. That's a big one. Takes up a whole wall for this one.
And his successor taught the same building and found a school there, and it had a colonnaded walkway called Peripatos. I'm surprised I can pronounce this all, because these are Greek words. So this gave the name Peripatetic to the school, not peripathetic. So
no, not pathetic. That means to walk around.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
As for Aristotle's thoughts, he considered himself a true successor of Plato, and he would start off with specifics and then group them into higher genera. It's in the book says genera, not general. And then the philosophy was in studying parts to understanding the whole. And also, I didn't put this there, but yeah, there was some belief, some of Aristotle's views that you know, Aristotle didn't completely agree with 100%. So he was in many ways he was kind of the opposite of Plato. So and also Aristotle divided things into two ways. One as substance, which is seeing things in nature in a moment, just like for the moment, and two as motion, when we see it as a world of change. Here's a better shot of the close-up. So, as for theory of knowledge, Aristotle reversed Plato's. This is what I was talking about. He reversed Plato's epistemology and many other things. So he was the opposite of Plato, his mentor, teacher. Sorry. And Aristotle influenced thought greatly, and his school contributed as a research institution. I think that's even still used today. So they don't wear robes like they did back in Greece. So.
Sure.
And as for the peripatetic legacy, the soul and understanding, it was very important to philosophy and religion. And Aristotle's philosophy was an alternative to Plato's view. And as for worldview, peripatetic viewed the natural world with religious overtones. And for the history of philosophy, peripatetic interests were in the lives of philosophers, the history of philosophical schools, and classification of thoughts and problems. And Aristotle's philosophy and teachings are especially influenced highly Western civilization and how it came to be, and like from the Middle Ages until it is from there until it is now. And it also influenced the whole world too. So, and also as for skepticism, dogma is the Greek word for opinion or view. So anyone says screeching dogma, that means, you know, your own personal views or opinions. And also it is the position one has after examining something. And as for this word skepticai was when one examines something without coming to a decision or a conclusion. And as for epouche, was if someone examined something and could not come to a conclusion, so they were indecisive, then the person suspends judgment. They're like, okay, I don't know what this is, okay, forget it now. And the academy went through a period of skepticism. And for skepticism, it was never an effective school. It was always negative and not influential, as what they thought. And the skeptics were the most conservative people in the ancient world. So yeah, they saw skepticism and thinking twice a little bit. It was always negative and not influential. So they just wanted one opinion, I guess. And now we're on to cynicism. And for this picture right here, this is the best I can come up with. The founding of the Cynic way of life is credited to Diogenes of Sinope, and he was known as, quote, dog, and had a movement and philosophy that whatever is natural is not indecent in public. And Diogenes also believed in a life of self-sufficiency where needs are kept to a minimum, and he gave everything away to gain independence. I think literally.
Yeah, that's a picture of Diogenes. He lived in a jar.
Literally.
Big jar. That's where he slept. Because he didn't want to own anything. So, and they call him the dog. Like you say, whatever is a natural function, he thought was not indecent. Now, there are certain natural functions that we don't display in public, typically, but they would. So cynics were dog-like. They would do things in public that other people would say you should only do in private, like dogs. Dogs don't care.
So he's like, dogs don't care, why should we, you know?
Yeah. Unless you have a very modest dog, but I've never met one of those.
As for Crates, he was a faithful disciple of Diogenes, and he was a wandering preacher who was known for his peacemaking efforts. There was Bion and Menepus that developed the diatribe style, and Telles was a follower of Bion, and he commended a life based on whatever is available. So whatever falls on your lap or whatever, you know, comes your way, even if it's by accident, you know, it's available and just take it, you know. So as for Zeno, he was the founder of Stoicism and was a disciple of Crates and upheld norms of society. And Cynics shocked the Greeks by abandoning manners and saying and doing whatever they wanted. So, and cynicism was not a formal school. It became more moderate and popular with preachers of Roman times, surprisingly not of Greece. And also, for Cynic characters, they tried to dispel illusions in human attitudes and conduct, and did not view life as in society as a whole as a life of ruling and being ruled. They denied pleasures and focused on hardness, apathy, and freedom. So they probably gave up on things like sexual pleasures or whatever. And Cynics believed a life of virtue could not be attained by, they could be attained by moral effort, and they had a boldness in speech. As for Dio of Perusa, he was called Cryostom, which means golden mouth. He gave the fullest collection of speeches and spoke about distinguishing from true cynics from others. And finally, there's Lucian of Samosata, who wasn't a philosopher but used satires on religious topics and common themes. So, kind of like on paintings and carvings and stuff like that. So, that's all.
Is that it?
That's
okay.
all. That's all, folks.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Any questions and/or comments? As I used to say, speak now or forever hold your peace. Oh, that was a wedding. Some people don't want you to say that at their wedding because they're afraid that somebody will say something.
If you're afraid of that, though, maybe it's a good thing to have that.
Well, yeah. All right, very good. It's a lot to cover. It's a lot to cover, you know, I mean, a lot of philosophers, a lot of stuff there. All right, let me pause this.
So my topic was eclecticism, Neo-Pythagoreanism, Middle Platonism, Platonists, and Neoplatonists. And they kind of covered the end of Greek philosophy as a independent driving force, because it still continues to influence other ideas today, but it's not really its own thing. So eclecticism has two definitions in philosophy. The first is a time period from 50 BC to 200 AD, where it didn't really seem like there was a lot going on because there wasn't any real defined schools of philosophy. But what was really happening was all of the different schools of philosophy were sharing with each other a lot more. So their ideas were becoming blended rather than them being distinct things that were in isolation from one another. They didn't really communicate. And the second is the specific school of thought that was made up of the idea that all philosophy is true at some point. You just have to boil down the extras that people keep adding on to it. And you get to pick and choose what you like from other philosophical movements to find what is best from all of them. And a big person for eclecticism was Cicero, who lived from 106 to 43 BC. He was born outside of Rome, not from the city, making him an outsider to the elite there. But he studied all over the Roman Empire. He kind of went to every school and took notes and wrote books about all the different philosophies. And so his writings are considered like a snapshot of what philosophy was like just before the empire rose up, just before Christianity started. It's like, okay, before any of that, what was the philosophical life like in the Republic? The reason he started studying philosophy was his daughter died, and the Roman paganism wasn't quite giving him the comfort that he was looking for from it, so he started studying all these other philosophies, and he made philosophy popular among the Roman elite, and throughout it was already a common thing, but you followed the pagan religions and you had a philosophy. He made just having a philosophy acceptable and brought back a lot of the older philosophies. At this point in time, people had kind of left Aristotle and Plato behind because they had moved on to new schools, and he brought a lot of the older ones back into popularity. So people were accepting a lot of things that they hadn't heard of before, which the book says laid a bit of a groundwork for, oh, Christianity's this new idea in the middle of all these other new ideas. So people were slightly more open to it, just as a philosophy, not so much as a religion. Then there's Neo-Pythagoreanism, which I thought was the strangest thing, because they boil the world down to numbers, and their religion is based off of numbers. So, like, the number 1 is holy because it can't be divided or negated, but all other numbers are made up out of it.
So that more is like about quantity, right?
Kind of, and it was just really weird. I thought I couldn't really understand what it was they actually believed. It just was like,
Did you read about the beans?
they didn't eat beans.
Do you know why?
No. Why did they not? Because they came in a pod of more than one?
No.
Why didn't they eat beans?
They didn't eat beans because certain things happen when you eat beans. And they believed that was, it had a spirit trapped in the bean. That you were then releasing. You can look it up.
I'm sure they
Like
believe
strange
that.
things about these guys, that is one of their quirks.
But what was more important than, as far as studying them from a Christian perspective, more important than their actual beliefs was the way they practiced. He was the first philosopher who, like, enjoyed having lots of people around him on the long term rather than pupils. They were like friends, and they went around together rather than people coming to him and he lived by himself.
You can't trust a guy like that.
Which is similar to what Jesus did.
Oh. Well, that's an exception. There's always an exception.
And he created a society that resembled the Christian church, or what the Christian church would grow to resemble.
A community.
Right.
More of a community.
And he made really definite practical ideas of what his philosophy meant for your lifestyle, like the beans. Certain other foods were forbidden. They encouraged monogamy rather than the sexual amorality, as we would call it today, that was common in the time, and the idea that souls go into new bodies upon death of the body rather than being stuck in a purely spiritual place, which, if we look at New Testament writings, we get a perfect body in heaven, but even that one's not perfect because New Earth and all that stuff. But it was an idea that
It's almost reincarnation.
right. Well, yeah, he stopped a guy who was kicking a puppy because he's like, oh, that puppy has the soul of a friend that I had,
Yes.
who has recently passed away. So they believed in reincarnation, but it was the first Western thought of getting a new body instead of going to a purely spiritual place.
Maybe you thought someone was reincarnated in beans.
Maybe someone was reincarnated in beans. The original Pythagorean movement was in southern Italy until Cylon of Crotos burned it down, scattered everyone, salted the earth, all that good stuff. And then Neo-Pythagoreanism was started by a friend of Cicero, Nigidius Figalus.
That'd be a good name for a novel.
That would be a good name for
I
a
think
lot
it
of
should be
things.
the name of your band, your new band.
New band, all right. And he started it, and it grew into secret societies that they had passwords, they met underground, and they started getting into magic, which wasn't quite what it started out as, and it survived until the 2nd century AD. And they wrote in their later writings after Christianity started, they looked up to Christians who didn't get martyred because they're like, oh, that's the lifestyle that we're looking for, of like wandering holy men and just having all this divine wisdoms, but we don't like the dying part.
Well,
And then Apollonius of Tyana, who was alive in the 1st century AD, was the most famous of the Neo-Pythagoreanists. And his life was often compared to Jesus because he traveled around, performed miracles, and he claimed his power was from a divine source.
A lot of his writings of his travels actually parallel, you can compare them to Paul and many of Paul's journeys. So he'll go and describe a city or describe a place, and many of these places are where Paul went. So some people who study New Testament studies have studied his writings. He has one called Description of Greece.
Okay.
I believe it's what it's called. And and it's talking about, of course, these guys would travel around, basically on the road, doing their show, doing their thing, and move from place to place. Much like Paul was moving from place, and it's a similar time frame.
Yeah.
So it's a nice comparison.
He was accused of witchcraft a lot during the time. People were like, it's kind of the same accusations that Jesus and Paul got. It's by the power of demons that you drive out demons, all that stuff. And his biographer was actually ordered to write the biography by the wife of the emperor. And so he wrote it down, and when he wrote it down, he made a bunch of defenses against the claims of witchcraft. And then that emperor's grandson, Alexander Severus, actually put philosophers on a much higher pedestal. He took down statues of the gods in his palace, and he put up statues of different philosophers, and he put up a statue of Jesus, considering him just like on that same, like these are just the smart guys who know something about what's going on more so than revering the gods, which were falling by the wayside. And Apollonius condemned a lot of aspects of pagan religion. He didn't like the sacrificial system. He said if you want to get close to the gods, you should just pray to them. He didn't get haircuts. He only wore linen. He was a vegetarian and encouraged everyone else to be vegetarian. A lot of things like that, which the religious people didn't like him, but again, religion was it was falling away to philosophy at this point in time. Then there's Middle Platonism, which is when Plato and Aristotle made their real comeback, and I would say it hasn't gone away. Their philosophy, as far as Western philosophy is considered, it's not an independent study anymore, but you can see their influence a ton on theology throughout the Middle Ages and the Renaissance and the Reformation, probably up into about 200 years ago. All of our medical knowledge was based off of what they wrote down and the study of their things. But the specific period of Middle Platonism was from, again, 50 BC to sometime in the 2nd century AD, kind of the same time frame of eclecticism. And this philosophy created the Roman idea of souls. So like if you're a Christian trying to convert someone and you talk about a soul, they're coming at it from the understanding of Middle Platonism. They had the idea of a supreme mind, which was the highest thing in existence, and everything else came from that. It's a combination of Aristotle's idea of the unmoved mover that had to start everything, and Plato's idea of the good, which everything aspires to be. A later philosopher said that these ideas were remarkably similar to the Jews' idea of what their one God is, and then he never kept going with the train of thought, and no one ever picked up on that. And they thought that direct knowledge of the supreme mind was impossible, but they were far friendlier towards religion than other philosophers. They saw it as a possible way towards enlightenment and a legitimate way to gain knowledge about the world rather than just study and questioning. And then Plutarch is a Middle Platonist. He was born to wealth in central Greece. He studied across the Roman Empire and wrote 2 works that provide the first one, Parallel Lives, is like gives a good look at literature and the historical record of this time period. And the second one, Moralia, is a lot about culture and religion. So it's kind of like the opposite of the flip side of Cicero, where he's right before the empire, right before Christianity. Plutarch gives us this snapshot of just after the empire, or 100 years after the empire, and just after Christianity has started, what does life in the Roman Empire look like? And then he spent the last 30 years of his life as a priest in Delphi, and he argued that the gods were aspects of one being and that religion should be applied directly to life rather than its own sphere, like going to the temple is its own thing. He thought religion should be part of everything you do. And he thought that the current polytheism that was around at the time was a poetic expression of an ancient truth, something else that had been diluted over time. He kind of thought the gods were facets of one thing, maybe, but his ideas never really got solidified about all of that. He wasn't quite willing to go far enough to say that there was one God, that all of the gods were a side of, but he was looking towards that idea. And then the last bit was Neoplatonism, which Middle Platonism, Neoplatonism, this is what came next. And it's the culmination of all the pagan intellectualism and philosophy. And it's the last real intellectual challenge to Christianity from the pagan world in Europe. After this, Christianity mostly just has to deal with heresies or outside religions, like the spread of Islam in the 800s. It did influence Christian thinking a lot, especially in the Greek Orthodox Church, because all of their theologians came from the same background of thinking, the same academic background as these philosophers. They were just like, I'm a Christian at the same time as I'm learning this. And they had an idea of the supreme being was at the top, but then there was a thing past that just called the one, and then you got the forms and on, and then the gods are down here, and everything emanates from this at the top. And the only thing that's evil is the absence of being, because all being comes from this one thing. Plotinus is kind of the most famous of these Neoplatonists. He's born in Egypt, studied in Alexandria. He had 54 books that are organized of him recording his students' discussions called the Enneads. And his student, Porphyry, wrote his biography and claimed he experienced union with the divine on 4 different occasions, which was a good thing, apparently. 4 was a lot, because the ultimate goal of this philosophy is to have union with the one or with the divine, which it's compared to Christianity, where we have that through grace and it's a constant thing. Here it lasts for a little bit and you get there through just like force of will, meditation, fasting, like you have to force yourself up versus God coming down. And the end of Greek philosophy is really as its own entity is in 529 AD when Justinian closes the academy in Athens, where Aristotle and Plato studied, and it was kind of the last bastion of it. The textbook describes it not as religious persecution, but as a decent burial for just a thing of the past now. And up until this point, between Plotinus and the closing of the academy, there's a few people who try to revive either Greek philosophy or Greek paganism, but none of them take off in the face of the overwhelming popularity of Christianity after Constantine. And that's the presentation.
That's it.
Yep.
Thank you.
So the honesty was any Egyptian with a Greek name?
Yeah, because the Greeks at this, or the Egyptians at this point, are mostly Greek after Big Al came through.
So even though Greece ruled them, his true ethnicity or nationality is Egyptian?
Probably a mix.
Go. Christian is next.
Alrighty, so I chose personal religion, demons, and superstitions, and I thought they were going to talk about like certain demons that they like had believed in, but Ferguson talked about what most people, like most philosophers, thought of what demons were. In general, Damien, which was demon, underwent important changes of the meaning, and generally referred to a power that accompanies persons and dispenses destiny. Homer classified it as use of impersonal power or the gods collectively as dispenser of individual events. Hesiod classified rationals beings as gods, demons, heroes, and people. His definition of demons was men of the golden age, translated to blissful immortal life. And he classification of demons prepared the way for demons to be considered lesser divinities or peacemakers between the gods and human beings.
It's a little different meaning than what we tend to have in Christianity. The demon's usually always bad.
Yeah,
Here, it's more of a spirit of the dead.
yeah.
Could be good or bad.
No angels or anything?
No. Well, in a way, some of them believed like demons were like an angel. I forget who it was, but I'll mention it. Socrates referred to a demon that warned him against certain actions. So when I read that, I was like, sort of like, I guess like the Holy Spirit mentions, like he sort of protects us from like doing certain things. Socrates gave demons a function almost like a conscience. Plato had a different belief. He thought that demons were the sons of gods by nymphs or other mothers. Demons serve as interpreters between gods and people. Plato also thought of demons being regarded as a destiny spirit, like a guardian angel or a companion of persons. He also believes that demon as the highest and divine element in a person. So they definitely see demons differently. Plato's student Xenocrates, Xenocrates systemized it into three different classes: permanently disincarnate beings, souls of the deceased, and the soul in or intelligence accompanying us. He believed that some demons were good and others were bad. This created an idea that everyone has two demons. In the 4th century BC, the word was deteriorating into use only for unlucky happenings.
One sits on one shoulder and one sits on the other shoulder.
Yeah.
So to speak. Yeah, go ahead.
Instead of blaming the gods, people were blaming the demons for anything that went bad. This is what created the idea that demons were evil. Plutarch and Apuleius.
Yeah, that's good.
How do you say it?
Apuleius.
Apuleius provided the early Christians ideas that demonic forces were everywhere and constantly affecting human life. So this is what we believe today. The admission that the gods of polytheism were demons played into the hands of Christians. Apologists claim that pagan religion was inspired by demons who had a gross enjoyment of sacrificing animals. Although Christians saw it as a sacrifice to demons, it was a sacrifice to what their gods were. Pre-Christian Judaism had already begun to take over the word demon in belief that, in the sense of evil beings, belief in demonic possession of individuals was widespread and led to the practice of exorcism, which is obviously to expel demons. Desdemonia, which it was the fear of demons, it was pretty common superstition back then. It is significant for the debasement of the idea of a demon that this form, because it did not include magic. Oh,
Today people call it demophobia.
Demophobia? Yeah, I didn't even know that. I have demophobia. But yeah, so I guess people just sort of had the fear that it was because they didn't believe that, magic was involved, and Plutarch presents superstition as the excess on one side of the mean of proper reverence for the gods, in contrast to atheism on the other extreme. So Plutarch believes that this superstition is worse than atheism. So that's what he was saying there. And translators dispute how much of this negative philosophical connotation to Desdemonia is intended by the use of word in Acts 17:22. And that's all Ferguson talked
That's
about.
it?
Yeah.
All right.
That's all
Thank
he
you.
talked about. Yeah.
Okay, who else has theirs ready to go today? No?
I have mine, but yeah, I cover the rest of it.
How much time do we have?
We have 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Well, let's see. I have Jeffrey. Did Jeffrey do his? Christian did his. Well, next time I guess we have Jeffrey, Colbury, Cole, yeah. But we don't have much time, so he'll have to go next time, I guess. So we have Cole, right? You still have to do yours. Cole, Jeffrey, Matthew. You did yours.
Yeah.
Brian. And Lane. You didn't do yours yet. All right, so next time we're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4. So we'll have to really watch the time frame. I'll have to time you better. And since we just have a couple minutes left, let me say just a few things about some of what was said today. We can see here the what your textbook is doing is trying to give you the world, the Roman world, the Greek world. We will talk about the Jewish world, but you get a lot of that in other classes, I think. And then, of course, the Christian world and how the Christians are in this world. And so I think it really, hopefully you can see how it affects the early church. Certainly the philosophy does. The teachings of Plato are just, they get embedded into Christian thinking, and they're still there today. I think probably too much. That's my own opinion. But it's certainly there. Platonism, Neoplatonism, that makes a resurgence during the sort of Reformation, Renaissance period as well. And so, you know, we even think of things in that way. For example, the idea that your soul is immortal. That's a Greek idea. In other words, that your soul could not, you know, that your soul always existed. This is the idea that, you know, your soul's kind of up there in heaven already. There's, I'll say, your future babies, and they're just waiting for their body to come down, to come in, that sort of thing, or that that kind of teaching, which I think is not really a biblical teaching, but it is merged in with Greek philosophic teachings. The Romans, of course, then borrow these ideas. They modify them. Some become much more popular with them. And we see they are already prone to what we would probably call superstition. And we see that some of these groups, some of these philosophical groups that we normally think of philosophers as being sort of emotionless, intellectual, you know, thinkers that just sit around reading books and stuff. That's not at all the image we ought to have. They were passionate, they were emotional, they had a wide range of beliefs, and most of them were very active in promoting their philosophy. And I think maybe it was somebody called them preachers, right? I guess that was Paxton used the word preacher. I think that's a good way. They were evangelistic for their point of view. And I think that is important to keep in mind. These were not sort of passive thinkers in an office somewhere, you know, just reading and writing books. They were out walking around like the Peripatetics. They were walking around. They were traveling from city to city. People would come to hear them. Remember, they were sort of the entertainment of their day, right? If you live in a town, you don't have any interwebs, as I call it. You don't have any television. You don't have any movies. You don't have any radio. You don't have all. The only thing music you hear would be live. And if somebody comes to town with this sort of information, it's almost like a traveling show. And they'd come to town for, let's say, a week or so. They would do their presentations, their talks, their evangelism, whatever, talk with people, and then they would move on to the next place. And so this is part of the reason I think we're warned, let's say in the New Testament, about false teachers, especially John, the epistles of John, Johannine epistles, about those who travel around and teaching false things and all that sorts of things. So we see this kind of thing in the early church as well. And of course, like you said, who was it said it? I guess it was Christian. The Christian apologists make a lot of mileage out of this idea of demons inspiring these other teachers. All right, let's leave it there for today. We'll see you next